her so much pain, but then her attitude toward James began to shift. It was subtle at first, forgetting to invite him to important meetings or brushing off his suggestions, things she used to value so much. James noticed it too but didn't say anything. He's always been the patient and understanding type. One night, we were all having dinner together, and Emily was talking about some new ideas Tom had for the wedding. James offered a suggestion, and Emily cut him off mid-sentence, saying, "Tom and I already decided on that." The look on James's face was heartbreaking. He just nodded and stayed quiet for the rest of the meal. There were other signs too. Emily used to ask James for help with things like fixing her car or going over her finances, but now she'd mentioned that Tom was taking care of those things. I could see James looking a bit lost, as if he wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. He never complained, but I could tell it was affecting him. I decided to talk to Emily about it one morning over coffee. "Emily, honey, I've noticed you've been a little distant with James lately. Is everything okay?" She looked at me, a bit surprised and annoyed. "Mom, you're overreacting. I'm just busy with the wedding and reconnecting with Tom. It's a lot to handle." I didn't want to push too hard, but I also couldn't let it go. "I understand, but James loves you so much. He's done everything to make sure your wedding is perfect. I just feel like he's being left out." Emily said she appreciated everything James had done but insisted that Tom, her real father, should walk her down the aisle. She wanted to give him the chance to be a part of it. Her words hurt me. I knew she wanted to connect with Tom, but I also knew how much James had given to her and how much he loved her as if she were his own daughter. I told her I understood but I didn't want James to feel pushed aside. Emily brushed it off, saying she wasn't excluding him, just trying to balance things now that Tom was back. Things didn't get better after that conversation. If anything, they got worse. Emily started calling Tom Dad in front of James, something she had never done before. The first time was when we were discussing the seating arrangements for the reception. She looked at Tom and said, "Dad, what do you think of this?" I saw James flinch a little, though he tried to hide it. He excused himself shortly after, saying he had work to finish. I tried to talk to James about it, but he brushed it off, saying he was happy that Emily was reconnecting with her father, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He had spent years being the father Tom never was, and now he felt like he was being pushed aside. Emily started spending more and more time with Tom, going out to lunch, having long phone calls and updating him on every little wedding detail. James was still there, helping and supporting, but it felt like he was becoming a background character in a story where he used to be the hero. Update: my daughter, whom my husband raised as if she were his own, has decided to honor a man who was absent from her life for years, her biological father, by having him walk her down the aisle on her wedding day. My husband, who has never hesitated to support her at every step, chose to quietly step back from funding the wedding, leaving behind a silence filled with pain and disappointment. Part 3. About a week ago, during a family dinner, Emily dropped a bombshell that left us all in shock. She cleared her throat and said she had been thinking a lot about the wedding and the roles everyone would play. She announced, "I want my real father, Tom, to walk me down the aisle." Her words hit like a thunderclap. James, who had been so excited to take on this role, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He took a deep breath and nodded, saying softly, "If that's what you want, Emily, I'll support your decision." The room fell silent. The air was thick with tension. It was clear that James was heartbroken, and I could see the pain in his eyes as he tried to hide it. After dinner, I pulled Emily aside and asked her if she realized how much her decision was hurting James. She brushed it off, saying, "Mom, this is my wedding, and it's important for me to give Tom this chance. James will understand. He's always been supportive." I couldn't believe her lack of awareness, or perhaps it was denial. I told her, "Emily, this isn't just about a symbolic gesture. It's about recognizing the man who has been there for you through everything. Do you really think Tom deserves this more than James?" She rolled her eyes and walked away, saying, "It's already decided. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." In the days that followed, things only got worse. Emily started calling Tom Dad openly, something she had never done before, and she excluded James from major decisions about the wedding. I saw James retreating emotionally, trying to stay strong but clearly hurting. He never said anything, but I could tell he felt like he was being erased from Emily's life. I decided it was time to talk to her again. One morning, over coffee, I said, "Emily, I understand you want to reconnect with Tom, but you can't just push James aside like this. He's done everything for you, and you're acting like he doesn't matter." She sighed and said, "Mom, I appreciate everything James has done, but this is about me and Tom. I need this for closure. I need to give him a chance to be a father now." Her words stung, and I realized she was determined to go through with this, no matter how much it hurt James. Finally, I sat down with James and asked him how he was feeling. He sighed and said, "I just want Emily to be happy, even if it means stepping aside. I've done my part, and if she feels this is important, I won't stand in her way." His selflessness broke my heart, but it also made me realize how much he was sacrificing for Emily. I told him, "James, you don't have to keep putting yourself last. Your feelings matter too." He just smiled sadly and said, "This is her day, not mine." That evening, I decided I had to draw a line. I told Emily, "If you're going to disregard James as a father, then we need to reconsider his financial involvement in the wedding. It's not just money, Emily, it's his way of showing his love and support. If you don't want him to have a role, it's unfair to expect his full support financially." She was furious, accusing me of being manipulative. She said, "You and James are trying to guilt me into changing my decision. This isn't about money, it's about family." I replied calmly, "Exactly, and James is your family, whether you choose to acknowledge that or not." The tension reached a boiling point when James made the decision to step back entirely from the wedding, both emotionally and financially. He told Emily, I love you, and I want the best for you, but I can't continue to invest in something where I feel like an outsider. I hope you understand. Emily was livid, accusing him of abandoning her, but I could see that James had made this choice to protect himself from further pain. Without James's financial support, Emily was forced to scale back the wedding. The grand venue was replaced with a simpler one, and many of the extras she had planned were no longer possible. I could tell she was frustrated, but she refused to acknowledge how her decisions had led to this point. As the wedding day approached, James and I made the painful decision not to attend. It felt impossible to sit through a ceremony that symbolically erased James's role in Emily's life. When the day finally came, we stayed home. It was one of the hardest decisions we've ever made, but we felt it was the only way to stand by James's worth and contributions to Emily's life. A few days after the wedding, Emily called. Her tone was accusatory as she said, "You and James ruined my wedding by pulling your support. Everyone's talking about how you weren't there." I took a deep breath and replied, "Emily, we didn't ruin your wedding. We simply made a choice to protect ourselves. You made your decisions, and we made ours." The conversation ended with tension still thick between us, and I wondered if we would ever truly mend the rift that had grown between us. Update: my daughter chose her absent biological father to walk her down the aisle over my husband who raised her, so he pulled his financial support for the wedding. Now, she's drowning in debt, her real dad disappeared again, and she's back at our door begging for help. Part 4. Months passed after the wedding, and the silence between us and Emily grew heavier. I had hoped that time would bring clarity and healing, but it seemed to only deepen the divide. James tried to move forward, pouring himself into his work and hobbies, but I could see the weight of Emily's rejection lingering in his eyes. One afternoon, out of the blue, Emily showed up at our doorstep, her eyes red and puffy. It was clear she had been crying. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Mom, can we talk?" James was out running errands, so it was just the two of us. I invited her in, unsure of what to expect. As we sat down, she began to explain, her voice trembling, "Mark and I have been struggling. The wedding put us in so much debt, and it's causing a lot of fights. I don't know what to do anymore." I listened carefully, feeling a mix of sympathy and frustration. She continued, "I know I made mistakes, and I know I hurt James, but I didn't realize how much until now." Her words surprised me, but I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear everything she had to say. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I thought reconnecting with Tom would fill a void, but after the wedding, he disappeared again. He hasn't returned my calls or messages, and I feel like a fool for believing he had changed. I felt a pang of sadness for her, but also a sense of vindication. This was exactly what I had feared would happen, and now she was facing the harsh reality of her choices. I took a deep breath and said, "Emily, I understand you're hurting, but you need to realize the impact your decisions have had, not just on James, but on our entire family. You pushed away the man who has always been there for you, and now you're facing the consequences of that." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Mom, I know I messed up. I just don't know how to fix it." At that moment, the door opened and James walked in, his eyes widening when he saw Emily sitting on the couch. He paused, unsure of what to do. Emily stood up, her voice shaking. "James, I'm so sorry for everything. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. You've been more of a father to me than Tom ever was, and I see that now. I just hope you can forgive me." James stood there for a moment, his face unreadable, then he walked over to her and pulled her into a hug. "Emily, I've always loved you, and I always will, but trust is something that has to be rebuilt. It's not going to happen overnight." It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I could see the relief in Emily's face and the glimmer of hope in James's eyes. It wouldn't be easy to repair the damage, but for the first time in months, it felt like we were moving in the right direction, as a family.